this off for a month. It's finally time. Oh boy. It's been like 2 weeks since we done this. Well, it's gotta come back one way or another. But yeah, welcome back, finally. With the world possibly making its way past with respiratory diseases. We good? Okay, cool. Seeing as I have no reason to leave my basement right about now, I figured I would probably continue making the reviews I promised you a month ago. So without further ado, let's get to our first game, which is this masterpiece right here. SpongeBob SquarePants, Battle for Bikini Bottom. Now, if you've never even heard of this game before, you must have been living under a rock, because it actually did pretty damn well.
This game was practically treated like a god when it was released on its original consoles. It made Player's Choice on GameCube, Greatest Hits on PS2, and Platinum Hits on the original Xbox, as well as eventually making the backwards compatibility list for the new Xbox 360 2 years later. This game has such a legacy that it's finally getting a remake on all modern consoles, the Rehydrated Edition for just $30, and should be out by the time that this video uploads. Well, that's if you don't factor in that I'm probably gonna buy the Fun Edition for $300 fucking dollars. Why do the tiki chains have to look so damn good?
Coming back to our original game, please forgive me if I don't mention literally everything about this game. The game itself takes about 6+ hours to complete, so if I miss some things, please forgive me. With that out of the way and me not talking about my poor financial decisions anymore, let's just get into this review and see where it all started.
As the sixth generation of consoles began their war in 2001, a company by the name of THQ decided they would continue their success in the game world by gaining the rights to a familiar yellow sponge we all know and love. In the past, THQ had already played part in a lot of Nintendo games, starting in 1991 with releases on Game Boy and Super Nintendo. They obviously played a part in Generation 6, since I actually mentioned a few games that they made last time, like the Monster Jam and SmackDown vs. Raw games.
This is the point in time you're expecting a shameless plug, like, if you haven't seen my video, please go watch it. However, if that thing disappeared off the face of the earth, I would not really bat an eye at it. I'm only keeping it there as a, hey, don't do this again.
Anyways, after obtaining the rights to Nickelodeon Superstar, THQ made themselves a game by the name of Revenge of the Flying Dutchman in 2002, and it was eventually known as the 10th Circle of Hell in disc format. Considering it was SpongeBob's first 3D romp on a home console, which is why I think it's somewhat excusable, it had some incredible growing pains. This is also the point in time I think when THQ thought,
well shit, that didn't go too well. Let's make another studio do the game for us, and then if it ends up being bad, we can just blame them. Yeah, that's what's gonna happen.
To cover up this failure, THQ then found the perfect studio to take on the new challenge of another 3D SpongeBob game. This studio was known as Heavy Iron. Heavy Iron's most successful game previously was a game called Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights. This was a pretty good game, but the studio knew there was much more that they could do, and with the licensing to another popular TV show, the world was their oyster. Finally, in the year 2003, SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom was officially released to the masses on Halloween in the US, sporting a box art that doesn't show off anything that happens in the game. Now don't get me wrong, this box art isn't bad by any means, however it's just kinda boring. Unless it's something I haven't seen, or it's something in the GBA version, which I will not be talking about because it's basically a different game, SpongeBob doesn't even put a helmet on in the game, and the only other time we see one is on the title screen, where it just kinda sits there behind the game title. Even the European box art wasn't much different, the only change being that he has no helmet, which makes more sense, and that he isn't pissed off for some reason. Turning it over, we get to see some of the adventures we'll be taking with our favorite Nickelodeon characters, giant boss fights, making a helicopter out of a lasso as Sandy, and physically assaulting random NPCs. Seriously though, in the game there is no reason to hit any of the NPCs you come across. Why is this here? I don't really mind, it just makes me laugh that it's shown prominently on the back of the box. I also find it funny that the review on the top of the back of the box says, "The SpongeBob game the world has been waiting for." It's almost like they predicted its cult following years later, even into recent times with new speedrun tricks being found almost every single day. I'd say we spent enough time on the box and the development hell before its full release, so let's pop it in our old trusty PS2 Slim and relive some memories, shall we? After being treated to our usual dosage of logos and product placement for the studios we would pledge our allegiance to, we finally get into the game, and boy, our first impression's everything. Even now, I think this title screen looks pretty good. It starts with the usual SpongeBob theme introduction, but with a bit of the 2003 trademark prevention edit in there, if you know what I mean. For the time, these graphics were pretty good, and even today they're pleasant to look at. I mean, come on, anything looks better than the N64 graphics at this point is better than nothing. Our first segment is a cutscene that shows the plot of this game. Plankton, who's up to his usual scheming, creates a giant robot that creates, well, you guessed it, more robots. This is where, looking back, I think this really shows that the plot was never the main concern. What happens, you ask? Well, just watch.
One last review of the checklist. Let's see. Item number 1, is Plankton a genius? Answer yes. Okay, checklist complete. Throw in the switch. Hey, hello? What do you think you're doing? Oh, no, wait.
Since this game is based off of a children's TV show, I can excuse the lazy writing, which again was never the main point of the game. Oh yeah, and there was that whole plot point of, oh, we put a toy robot into a shell.
It's not just any shell, it's my magic wishing shell.
But it never really went anywhere. Your first job is to navigate all of SpongeBob's house and collect the game's equivalent of coins, simply called shiny objects. With enough shiny objects, you open the closet door and gain your first main collectible, the golden spatula. With this revelation, now's the time I mention that this game is an open-world collectathon, similar to games like Banjo-Kazooie or Super Mario Sunshine. Think of it like your golden spatulas are shine sprites or jiggies. This is your main goal, to collect as many spatulas as possible by the end of the game. At 15 spatulas and 40 spatulas, you must fight a boss to unlock the next area, each time gaining a new ability. First, you unlock the Bubble Bowl, and then the Cruise Bubble. I'll touch more on this later. Also, for some reason, your health is underwear, and when you pick up another pair, it whistles at you. Ugh, weird. Now that you know all of this, you can collect all the spatulas in any way you see fit, always starting with the first world, Jellyfish Fields.
If any of you've played the more recent Super Mario games, it's kind of like that. The very first world is, more of a safe place for you. However, I think Jellyfish Fields does this absolutely amazingly, and I think is the best world to start with ever. Am I blinded by nostalgia and only looking at things with rose-colored glasses? No, not at all. Nah.
Jellyfish Fields is a perfect opening world for a game like this. I admit I'm a huge sucker for sound design, specifically music, and JF Fields delivers on this perfectly. A bubbly, no pun intended, happy and memorable score that will earworm its way into your subconscious. At the very end of the world, there's also a boss fight, being King Jellyfish. This one is incredibly easy, but the only reason I can excuse it is because it's the very first boss fight you ever do. It still does drop its points for being easy, you can't escape that fact. With that said, JF Fields is an amazing first impression for a game that came off the back of this thing. All of the 9 worlds in this game follow this routine of amazing music and visual design, and going over all of them would take forever. I just felt that this world deserved the attention since it's the first world you ever experience. I'll mention a few here that are my personal favorite. JF Fields, because why the hell not? Rock Bottom for the amazing atmosphere shift and giving me the ability to see my sleep paralysis demon without being asleep. Kelp Forest because of the, in my opinion, best music in the entire game. Sand Mountain because it took a minigame gimmick and made a whole world out of it without being too repetitive. And finally, the Dream World, just for how creative it is, especially Sandy's section. I think it's really interesting. And it was clearly designed just for her. Now don't get me wrong, all the other worlds are fantastic, and I seriously think you should just play it for yourself to experience them all in your own time.
After your first 3 worlds, seeing as this game is divided into 3 worlds per each section and there are 3 sections, you have to go through a boss fight which unlocks the next area and gives you a new power. Seeing as all of these are pretty good boss fights, I may as well just go through all of them in a rapid-fire sort of way now.
Robo Sandy is first, which has you swapping from SpongeBob, then Patrick, then back to SpongeBob. I think it was a good fight. Decent music, unlocks a pretty useful projectile, and isn't too hard, which does drop at some points. Boss fights should be easy enough to defeat after figuring out the pattern, but also challenging enough that it should still feel like a challenge. Robot Sandy is a bit too easy for my taste, but hey, that's just me. I think it's a good opening boss fight, but it lacks some difficulty, so like a 6.5 out of 10. Next up is Robot Patrick, and to be honest, I think I could make an entire video on just this boss fight. Maybe a best boss fights video later on down the line, huh? Back to the actual thing, I think it's the best of the 3 main boss fights. Decent challenge, gets more use out of Sandy, and a score that sounds like it was ripped straight from a Luigi's Mansion game. Though saying that makes it sound like I'm accusing them of stealing a music style, but it fits so well, being good enough for it to always be remembered and just eerie enough to make you feel unsettled all the time. As a kid, I was terrified of how weird the character model for RoboPat looked and the false thought of, holy shit, he just killed Squidward and SpongeBob! Absolutely the best boss fight. 9 out of 10 easily. Finally, we have Robo SpongeBob / Robo Plankton. This fight is so absolutely relentless and unforgiving that it makes Dark Souls look like a children's coloring book! In all seriousness, this fight is still unforgiving as hell, and the following level is even worse, but not awful once you realize the patterns. You do have the option to replenish your health, but even then the game punishes you for doing that, by sending Robo Dickwad here to come and kill you, when you are trying to get health back. However, here's my main issue. This is one of the very few cases in this game of music not being very great. At the time of writing this, I can't even remember the tune or what it was based around. That seriously docks points for me personally. This fight was supposed to be the big triumphant moment of finally beating the game and feeling accomplished. But instead it feels like, oh thank God that's over, and not, wow, that was a great game that I just played through. Does this fight make the game bad? Hell no. Does it prevent it from being a 10 out of 10? Yes, but not by itself. I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Unforgiving and unremarkable.
Since this game was part of my childhood, you can't really blame me for being blinded by nostalgia and loving this game for literally everything it has. However, don't think I don't have some bad things to say about it.
My first point here isn't necessarily negative, but I feel it's something that needs to be said. Rock bottom. Throughout this whole game until this world, everything was something that made sense in a SpongeBob game, making it happy and kid-friendly. Rock bottom, or the 5th world in the sequence, throws this entire idea out the window. Maybe as a kid I was just a little bitch, but this world is terrifying at first glance. The whole world is dark and dim, some NPCs look mutated, obviously referencing the actual SpongeBob episode, and finally, the music. This scared the crap out of me as a little kid, and it still gives me flashes of PTSD when this motherfucker shows up. I mean, come on, you can't tell me as a kid that wouldn't be scary. The proximity glow gets darker the closer you get, and the darker it gets, the more crunched into the fetal position you become.
Okay. I think I'm good. When it really comes to this world, it's not a big deal, but once you compare it to everything else in the game, it's such a far cry to what you'd expect. You know, something usually that's kind of kid-friendly, and then you go back to it as an older child and realize, wow, this is actually kind of cool and mysterious. I like it. Oh, I was supposed to talk about bad things. Shit.
Now onto the real downsides of the game. As previously mentioned, the final boss fight's difficulty. Everything in the game previously had some challenge, but nothing this hard. The patterns aren't terrible once you learn it, but it takes a bit to figure it out. The real difficult thing is the final level, where you have to break a bunch of fuses inside Robo SpongeBob's brain to shut it down. Sounds pretty straightforward. Fight the waves of robots on each platform, make your way to the fuse, and use different parts of your arsenal to hit the fuse. Finally, make your way to the brain and destroy the last 3, 4, I don't really remember. Here's the kicker. Robo Plankton came back. He shoots at you every time there's a break in the action. Every single time. To make him go away, you have to cruise bubble him, and he waits for the next time there's an opening. Problem is, he always moves when you try and shoot, so unless you're the American sniper, it's gonna take you a few tries to actually hit him. Think that was bad? The braid segment exists. Just remember that much. To finally beat the game, you have to fire the cruise bubble into these holes and direct it to hit the fuse directly. If inverted controls don't piss you off enough to do this multiple times, how about trying to do it when Robo Plankton is shooting you every few seconds? So you have to wait for an opening to shoot him, hit him before he starts up again, fire a cruise bubble down the tube, and hope you manage to hit it. Did you miss your shot on the fuse? Do all those steps again. Oh, and did I forget to mention, there is no checkpoints. Not one. So you have to do the whole thing in one beautiful run, or it's back to the start of the level. After doing it multiple times like speedrunners do, it's not terrible, but good God is this unnecessarily difficult. This has got to be my biggest issue with this game, and the only saving grace is that it's the final boss, so you don't have to do anything else after it if you don't really want to.
Besides that whole thing, the only issues I have is just small errors. Kind of like when you use the bubble bowl, you have to be just at the right spot when it hits the ramp or else it's going to pop on you, and then if you miss, it's just going to go all the way out. Other than those little tiny issues, this is the only real bad thing about the game, the final boss level. And that's one of the few things that speedrunners haven't been able to skip. Does that work for a transition?
Obviously, you can't talk about this game without mentioning the massive speedrunning community around it, with people like JBHJ and Shift putting out content on this game even to this day. So many tricks and game-breaking mechanics have been found, like cruise boosting, skee ball abuse, and finding hidden ways to skip boss fights, and so much more. This game has a huge cult following to this day, and it's only reinforced by the Rehydrated edition coming out this month. I could make a separate video on just the speedrunning portion of the game, but Shift already did the work for me and made a video on the speedrunning history of this game, which I will link in the description, or if I can figure out how iCards work, I'll do that. Battle for Bikini Bottom is undoubtedly the best SpongeBob game out there, at least I think so. And I'll ask you all this one more time. Please play it for yourself. It has amazing world design, unique playable characters, and just an overall fun value. If you're starting a collection or just want to pick up something from this era, I think this is a mandatory one for you to snag for yourself.
Even now, a game based off of a cartoon sponge just for corporate reasons still holds a place in many people's hearts. I'm definitely one of them, and I 100% understand why. Let's hope that THQ Nordic keeps the fun coming with the Rehydrated edition. I'm Gus. Thanks for stopping by.